We're being overrun. We have to fall back.
Negative, soldier. Hold your position.
Captain, with all due respect, we are out of time.
Retreat to the eastern ridge line. We'll cover you.
Copy that. Run our way. Hey friends, welcome back to another video. Today we are talking about muzzle flashes. Do you know how hard it is to like shoot a fake gun and not make sound effects? I really want to make sound effects. I'm just going, I don't know. Try it, it's really hard. Anyway, you know all those action films with the cool gunfights that you've seen here on the channel? No? Oh, well that's because whenever I get to the point where I have to put in the muzzle flashes, I always chicken out because I have no idea what I'm doing. Well, that changes today, my friends. I'm going to show you how to make a muzzle flash. I've done a bunch of research and I've found what I believe to be the ultimate list of things that you need to include to make your muzzle flash look realistic. Let's jump into the computer and I'll show you how it's done. So here we are inside of After Effects and I've added my footage to a new composition. Now let's just have a look at it and you'll see that I'm moving backwards and I'm shooting the gun and we need a muzzle flash to be right about there. That's right where the gun's kicking up and we're going to need to add in a muzzle flash. So the first step in our ultimate list is to add the gun blowback. Now the gun blowback is where this slide in the gun actually moves backwards. So if your prop gun happens to do this for you, you're off the hook. But if like me, your prop gun just stays still, you will need to add it with visual effects. Don't worry, it's not too hard. So what I'm gonna do is find my frame where I want my muzzle flash to occur. This frame right about here. What I'm gonna do is duplicate my footage and then I'm going to mask out the barrel of my gun. So if I zoom in here, I'm gonna go up to the pen tool. I'm gonna mask out the top part of the barrel, which is where the slide would be. So you'll see if I was to just solo this layer, now we just have a cutout of the slide and we can move that wherever we want. What I'm gonna do is cut the layer so it only appears on that one frame where we want the blowback to be. Now I'm gonna go up to my selection tool and what I'm gonna do is move this layer back a little bit until it looks like a position where the slide could be blown out. I'm gonna turn off my mask path visibility here so I can just see what I'm working with. I'm gonna add a directional blur to that top layer. Now I'm gonna turn up the blur length a little bit and I'm going to drag the angle so that it sort of matches the direction that my gun is in. I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the feather of the mask a little bit. Maybe we'll set it to 1. That way it's just a little less harsh, maybe 2. 2 looks good. So the next step is to actually cut a little bit out of the gun so that it looks like the slide is moving. So we're gonna need to create a clean plate of the footage behind where the gun is. So to do that, what I'm gonna do is go back to my full view and I'm gonna find a place in the timeline where the gun is not obscuring the background. So maybe right over here looks good. I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate the footage layer again and I'm gonna cut it so that it only affects this one frame, and then I'm gonna drag that frame to align with where I currently have my gun placement. Now if I zoom in here, you'll see that the point behind where the gun is actually back to the background footage. And if I was to half the opacity here so you can see, we've actually revealed a part of the background footage that wasn't visible before behind where the gun is. Now we just wanna cut that little bit out so we can use it as a background plate. So I'm gonna return this to 100%. I'm gonna take my mask tool and I'm gonna go ahead and cut out a little bit of a mask. We just need it to cover where the front of the gun would be. So now we've revealed a bit of a background plate behind our gun. We're gonna have to readjust it a little bit so that it fits a little better, because I can see that tweak in the background is actually in the wrong place. I'm gonna realign my mask so that it's cutting out this top portion of the gun. So now you can see we've removed the front part of the gun and it looks like the slide is actually going back. So if we return to a full scale here, we might just feather that mask a little bit as well. We'll just go into the mask settings and we'll adjust the feather. Maybe we'll give it 2. So if we play this back now, it actually looks like we're getting a blowback from the gun. It's only for that one frame, but it looks like we're getting a blowback. For example, the before, the blowback, and the after. So the next thing to do is to add in the muzzle flash. Now you can use either a muzzle flash image, some stock footage, or you can do what I'm gonna do and create my own from scratch using some fractal noise and a couple different techniques. Whichever one's gonna work for you, that's fine. Let me show you how I'm gonna create it from scratch though. So back inside After Effects, I'm gonna create a new layer and I'm gonna make a new solid layer. I'm gonna name it Muzzle Flash and hit OK. Now I'm gonna go ahead and pre-compose this layer. I'm gonna move all attributes even though there's none there. Now if I go into my new comp, I can go and add some fractal noise and I'm gonna turn up the complexity a little bit. I'm gonna turn down the brightness and turn up the contrast. I'm gonna go into the scale and I'm gonna add some more scale to it so we can see the elements a bit clearer. And all I'm looking for is a cool muzzle flash looking arrangement. So I'm just gonna move around inside of the layer here and move these fractals around until I find something that I like. I like this part here, so I'm gonna go to the pen tool and I'm gonna cut it out. I'm gonna add my black background back in. Now you'll see we got some sharp edges here. If I turn off my mask path, you can see we got some sharp edges. We're gonna fix that with a roughen edges effect. I'm gonna adjust the border a little bit, turn up the sharpness, and turn up the scale. And now we've got rid of those edges. There's a before and an after. Now I'm gonna go and create a new layer and another new solid layer. Gonna call this whites. And what I'm gonna do is add another fractal noise to it. And now on this fractal noise layer, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set my bottom fractal noise layer to be a loom matte. So what this has done, if you have a look at the before and after, if we have a look at the before layer, you'll see we've got these really bright white overexposed areas. We're adding a luma matte with the fractals, so that basically those bright white areas get replaced with our new fractal noise. It creates the illusion of dynamic range, and it also just helps to create a more pleasing muzzle flash. Now I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to add a CC radial blur. I'm going to turn the amount down a little bit. And I'm going to adjust my center point so it sort of comes from where the gun in the scene was. Let's just check our angle. It's pretty straight on. I'm going to add a curves effect. I'm just going to bring up the reds a little bit and bring down the blues a little bit. This is just going to give us a really nice orange hue. So if I go back to my footage here now, we have this awesome muzzle flash inside the composition. I'm going to go ahead and set it to a screen overlay, and then I'm going to scale and position it so that it's right near our gun at an appropriate scale. Bearing in mind that the diameter of the muzzle flash should be roughly around the length of the gun in size. I'm going to cut the muzzle flash layer so that it's only visible on that one layer that we have where our gun blows back. Now what I'm going to do is add some haze. Now to add some haze, we want to duplicate our muzzle flash layer. We want to take our bottom one and then add some Gaussian blur to it. I'm going to turn up the blur amount a lot. Now you'll notice that we have some haze there. And I'm just going to adjust the opacity of that bottom layer as well, just to get it to fit a little better. For brighter environments, you actually need a little bit less of a haze or a glow around your muzzle flash. But for darker environments, you'll want a little bit more. So adjust the opacity until it looks good for your scene. So that's the basic muzzle flash, but now what we want to do is integrate it into the scene, and we're going to add some glow and some lighting to different parts of our scene, because the light that's coming from the muzzle flash is going to actually relight elements of our scene. You could do that on set with a practical light, as long as it fires really quickly, and if you use a blank in a gun, it'll do the same thing. But because I didn't do either of those things, I'm going to have to do it digitally. Let me show you how to do that. There's a couple steps involved. So now I'm going to add some muzzle tip glow. So I'm just going to hide my muzzle layers, and I'm going to zoom in on my gun here. I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to position it below my muzzle flashes, and I'm going to go to just the frame before where my muzzle flash is. I'm going to take the elliptical mask tool and just draw a circle around the actual tip of the barrel. Now I'm going to clip it to be one frame. I'm going to add a brightness and contrast effect to it. And I'm just going to up the brightness a lot. I'm going to add a curves effect now, and I'm going to raise the red channel a little bit to give it a fiery look. I'm going to add a tint effect now, and I'm going to remap the white to a bit more of a brilliant orange color, a bit more fiery. And now what I'm going to do is duplicate my brightness and contrast effect and bring it to the bottom of the stack here. So now you'll see we've got this cool orange looking glow in the tip of my gun. And now what I'm going to do is just feather out the mask a little bit. And now we can move this layer so that it's in line with our gun. I might just position it based on the reference footage. So now we have the tip of the gun with a little bit of fiery, explosive looking muzzle flash. We need to create a little bit more of an effect on the area around where that muzzle flash is happening. I'm going to create a new adjustment layer, making sure it's positioned just above the previous one. And I'm going to make a cool looking muzzle flash pattern using my pen tool to make the mask. I'm going to make sure I really feather the edges of this one so it blends a lot. So we'll definitely go ahead and feather that up. I'm going to add an exposure effect, and I'm going to raise the exposure up a little bit. I'm going to add a curves effect now. I'm going to raise up the red channels just to keep that fiery look about it. And now I'm going to add a turbulent displace. Now I'm going to have to turn the amount down quite a bit for this. We just want a little bit of displacement, a bit of a smaller size of displacement, and up the complexity a little bit. This is just going to mimic the heat that's going to come out of the gun, because when heat travels through the air, it actually warps the space around it a little bit. So we're just going to mimic that just a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that I also clip this to just the single frame of the muzzle flash. Now the last bit of relighting we're going to want to do is actually to relight the scene. because as the muzzle is flashing, we're actually going to get light appearing on my hands and down my arm, maybe on my face a little bit, maybe even on the tree. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and make another new adjustment layer. We're going to position that below our muzzle flashes and above the previous layers. And now I'm going to get my pen tool and I'm going to go in and I'm going to mask out places that I want this light to affect. Now it's good to use a separate mask for each little section of where you want the light to appear. That way you can adjust the mask opacity to have places that are further away less affected by the light and get some realistic fall off. So now that I've found all the places that I want to add my glow to, I'm going to go ahead and add a brightness and contrast effect. And we're just going to crank up the brightness a little bit. We're going to add a curves for some color correction. We're going to bring the reds up a little bit for the fiery color, and also just bring the greens up. Now, if I go ahead and turn off my mask, you can see we've got some pretty hard lines there. So we're going to want to go through all of our masks and integrate them a little bit more into the scene. I'm going to turn the feather up. This is only going to be visible for one frame, so you can be as meticulous or as not meticulous as you like. So long as it looks decent, it should be okay. Now the face is a little bit far away, so I might actually turn down the opacity just a touch, just a little bit. Maybe we'll go down to 80, 88. Just so it's a little bit less bright on my face, because my face is further away from the gun, and we just want to match that distance because the light's going to fall off a little bit. And this one's a little far away as well on the bottom of my arm down there, so we're going to turn down the opacity on that one as well. We're going to cut it so that it's only visible on the muzzle flash frame. And now if we have a look at the before and after with that effect, you can see that we've added a real nice glow to our character where the muzzle flash light would be coming from. So if we watch the clip through now, you can see that we get a little bit of light on our character at the frame of the muzzle flash. So the next thing to do is to add in some smoke, because there is smoke that comes out of the gun when the bullet is shot. Now, some important realism tips for smoke is that the smoke is actually already a little bit expanded by the time it comes out of the gun. So if you have a smoke asset that starts from this little smoke ball and poofs out into a larger puff, you're actually going to want to cut the first couple frames on there so it's already a little bit into the puff motion by the time it hits our gun, because that's how the realism of guns works. So we're going to make sure we do that. I've already cut my smoke composition here. I've already brought my smoke asset in. This smoke asset I'm using is actually free if you download it from the Corridor Crew muzzle flash tutorial video. I'll link that in the description down below and also up here, so you can go and check that out and get this free smoke asset. Or you can just Google smoke assets or use one that you happen to already have. I've got my smoke asset in a separate comp here. I'm just going to drag that in, and that's going to go under my muzzle flashes. Now, the reason I have it in a separate comp is so that if I wanted to change out the smoke asset, I could very easily do that without affecting anything else. I'm going to change the blending mode to screen to get rid of my black background. I'm going to navigate to my muzzle flash, and now I'm going to reposition my smoke so that it's just over the muzzle flash, and it should be roughly the same size. So I'm going to reposition it, I'm going to scale it down, and I'm going to drag mine over to where it starts, because I know that the start point is where the smoke is just going to be expanded a little bit. Now, it's a little bit too obvious, so we're going to turn the opacity down just a little bit, and then I'm actually going to keyframe it out over a couple of frames. So I'm going to let it play for a couple of frames, and then we'll keyframe it right down to 0. Now, if you have a shot that's really moving and the gun is going to be moving quite a bit, you're actually going to need to track your scene and then parent your smoke layer to that track. That way it moves with the scene. But because we have a pretty smooth camera movement here, and we're actually not moving too much, and because I'm fading out pretty quickly, I think we'll be okay with what we've got here. But that's something to note for different types of shots, especially if you have camera shake in your shot. You're going to need to track the smoke into the scene. Now, the next thing to do is actually to create a little dust cover hole so that a bullet casing can pop out of that. Now, some guns will already have a dust cover hole, and then you can just use that, but because we don't, we'll have to create it for ourselves. Now, there's a little note here. Not every shot will actually require this, because the dust cover hole is only on one side of the gun, is my understanding. And so if your side of the gun with the dust cover is not facing the camera, you can actually just bypass this step entirely. So if I look at my gun here, I've got this little cover hole right about here. Kind of hoping you can see that. So I know that it's actually on the right side of my gun. So if I'm seeing the left side of my gun in the shot, I know I actually don't need to do this technique. But I'm going to show you just for the sake of showing you, in case you do need to do it. I'm going to go and create a new solid layer. I'm actually going to sample a color, which is the shadow color from the gun. So probably somewhere about there. And now, if I just go ahead and take it down to 0 for a second, I'm just going to mask a part of the gun out here, roughly where my dust cover hole would be. And now I can bring it back up to 100% opacity. and I would have a little dust cover hole in there. Then I can go ahead and cut my layer so that it only appears over where the bullet would be ejected, which is during the muzzle flash. And then I would also make sure I went ahead and feathered out my masks a little bit so it blends a bit better. And then I would have a dust cover hole. But in my case, the dust cover hole is on the reverse side of my gun, so I will not have to do this. I'm going to go ahead and delete that layer, that being the case. The next thing we're going to have to do is add a bullet shell, because when the gun is fired, the bullet shell is going to come out of that dust cover hole. So I'm using a cool bullet shells pack from Action VFX. I will leave a link in the description to that if you want to download it. It is entirely free, and you can use the exact same asset as me. I've got my bullet shell asset right here. I'm going to click and drag that in and put it below my smoke and my muzzle flash layer. So you can see if I just solo this layer, this is what it looks like. It's already pre-keyed, which is super helpful. And you can see it's a little big, so we're gonna have to scale and rotate and position this, and I'm just gonna position it where the bullet in the gun would be. So I'm gonna have to solo this layer and maybe solo my background layer as well, just for a reference. I'm going to take it from the start of the bullet casing because it has this cool animation of it spinning out. And now I'm going to scale it down to an accurate scale. And then I'm going to position it a little better. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to rotate it to match the angle of my gun. So now I'm going to have to keyframe this bullet casing to fly out of the gun. So I'm going to start a position keyframe on the first frame here. I'm going to go forward a good few frames. And then I'm going to set another keyframe position to move the bullet casing off the screen. And now I'm going to use these handles to adjust the path because we want it to have a nice arc, sort of like it's been ejected out and then gravity has taken it to the ground. So if we play that back, you can see that the bullet casing gets ejected out. So I'm going to zoom right in here and I'm going to add a curves effect to my bullet shell. Now the idea of this is I'm going to color correct the bullet shell so it matches the scene. I'm going to pull down the shadows just a little bit, take out a little bit of the redness, add a little bit of green to it, add a little bit of blue to it. Just going to color correct it into the scene a little bit. Now, because it's going to come out from the other side of the gun, I will have to make a mask around the gun so it's not visible for that first frame there. This is because the dust cover is on the opposite side of the gun, but if your dust cover hole is on the side of the gun that you've seen, in other words, you had to use my previous step of creating that dust cover, you don't have to do this. So I'm going to take my pen tool, and with my bullet casing layer selected, I'm just going to draw around the top of the gun here. I'm going to go to my mask, and I'm going to keyframe the mask opacity. So I'm going to click the stopwatch, I'm going to move that 100% frame, one frame further in time, and then I'm going to start this one at 0. So now, you'll see by the time we get to the next frame, the bullet casing is now over here and visible, but that first frame, it's behind the gun, and it's not visible. Now, what we'll have to do is toggle our switches and modes here. We've got to make sure that we enable motion blur, and then we need to make sure that motion blur is enabled in the composition as well. The last thing to do is actually to add blinking to our actor, because when a gun fires, the light and the sound actually causes us to blink. So if you were shooting a gun with blanks or a prop gun with an actual loud sound effect, you might end up with an actor that's already blinked, but if you haven't, like mine, and my eyes are fully open whilst I'm taking this shot, we'll need to add a blink in. Let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to use a different shot here to show you how the blinking works. My other shot's actually not great for this. So if I play this shot through, you'll see there's actually later on in the shot, a place where I do blink as a human. There it is, right there. Now what I'm going to do is take that footage layer on the bottom, I'm going to duplicate it. Let's zoom in down here, and let's go from the first frame where I'm not blinking. I'm going to cut the footage there, and now I'm going to go a few frames in to where I finish blinking. We're going to go about there and cut the footage there. Now I'm just going to bring this footage layer over in line with my muzzle flash, and now what I'm going to do is just mask out my eye. We're going to turn up the feathering quite a bit, and now we're going to reposition this layer just a little bit so that it aligns with the position of my eyes. I'm going to do the same thing with the other eye, so I'm just going to duplicate my eye layer. I'm going to delete the mask. Now I'm going to draw a new mask over my other eye. And I'm going to reposition the layer so that it sits with my eye a little better. Now if I play back the footage, you'll see my eyes actually blink as the muzzle flash goes off. Well, there you have it. That is our muzzle flash visual effects. We added in the footage, we added in the muzzle flash, we did the gun blowback, we added some haze, we added some smoke, we relit the scene with the gun tip, the area around the gun, and the area of the scene around the gun. We also added in the bullet shells, the dust cover hole, and even blinking to the eyes. So much to do. Let's have a look at our final shot. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you got some value from this video. If there are things that you do when you're doing your muzzle flash visual effects and I didn't mention them, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you and I'd love to learn from you and add to my process as well. Whilst you are down there, make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, make sure you hit the notification bell. There's plenty more action scenes coming now that we know how to do muzzle flash effects, so get excited for those. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week, Wednesday. See you then. Seriously, try not to make sound effects when you're doing that. It's not possible.